Montana wilderness, January 1876. For 48 hours, nature's fury had ravaged the peaks without mercy. Howling winds descended from the frozen summits, stripping bare the evergreen slopes while shrouding everything in endless white. This was the kind of tempest that erased all traces paths. Recollections. Whole, X-S-T-E-N-C-E-S. Edgar Bellamy pulled his thick buffalo hide closer as he fought through the mounting snowdrifts. Though only 37, grief had weathered him far. Beyond his years, ever since Maria's passing, solitude had become his companion, just him and Smokey, his faithful, sorrel gelding. Dwelling in silence above Elk River in their timber dwelling meant for partnership, but now haunted by echoes and persistent memories. Smokey had disappeared during the storm's peak the previous evening. Edgar awoke to find empty fencing and partially buried tracks heading westward. Pursuing his horse in such conditions seemed reckless, yet Smokey represented more than livestock. He was Edgar's final connection to his former existence. Bitter. Air stung his cheeks as he traced the path down into the gorge. The hoofprints had wandered astray, threading between towering pines toward the water's edge. Then something unusual caught his attention. Smaller impressions, unmistakably human. Unshod feet. Edgar halted, staring in disbelief. These marks were fragile and light, completely out of place. Too petite for any grown man, too bare for proper footwear. He knelt down, running his gloved fingertips across the depression. What kind of soul ventures barefoot through this blizzard? A chill crept up his spine that had nothing to do with winter's bite. Following these strange tracks, he watched them stumble through the powder, winding toward a cluster of willows near the river's curve. There, beneath an unnatural mound of pristine white, something disrupted the landscape's natural contours. A form, too uniform, too motionless. Edgar dropped to his knees and began clearing away the snow. The surface layer felt almost warm against his fingers. A torn blanket emerged first, woven in muted crimson and azurtha type worn exclusively by tribal peoples. Then a hand appeared, small, bronze-colored, lifeless. Dear God. His movements became frantic. A shoulder surfaced, then a face youthful. Barely past childhood, jet-black hair clung to colorless cheeks. Her lips had turned violet, her eyelids fluttering like failing moth wings. Apache, pressing his ear to her chest. He detected a heartbeat weak, but present. Without pause, he lifted her from her snowy grave. She felt impossibly light and cold enough to sting. Wrapping her first in the native blanket, then his own coat, he held her against his chest. "Stay here with me," he whispered urgently. "Don't slip away." He whistled sharply the familiar call. Smokey recognized. For a moment, only wind replied. Then came a soft whinny. The horse materialized between the trees, mane crystallized with ice, eyes wide with shame. "You fool," Edgar muttered under his breath. "We'll settle this matter later." Draping the woman across the saddle, he mounted behind her, encircling both, her and the saddle horn with his arms. Smokey turned carefully, navigating the treacherous snow. The world became nothing but white void and cutting wind. Edgar leaned forward, using his body as a shield against the storm's assault. She remained motionless, no longer shivering, lying limp as something already departed. Their cabin materialized through the blizzard like a phantom. Barely any smoke escaped the chimney. Edgar dismounted and carried her to the entrance, which protested with a groan as he forced it open. Inside, the air was frigid but not lethal. He positioned her near the stone fireplace, then hurried to revive the dying coals. The flame sparked with sharp crackling sounds. Pine logs fed the growing fire, breathing warmth back into the room. "Come on," he urged, speaking more to himself than to her. "Come on, young one." With clinical precision, he removed her soaked garments. He gathered every blanket he possessed, including the one that still carried Maria's scent, and cocooned her completely. Prepared willow bark tea, helping her drink it drop by drop, supporting her head tenderly. Though her skin remained cold, the gray pallor in her lips began to fade slightly. He settled beside her, joints aching, breathing labored. "Stay here with me," he pleaded again. "Please don't go." Dancing flames painted shadows across the walls. Outside, the tempest continued its assault. Inside, a man who had already laid one woman to rest refused to let winter claim another. In the quiet moments between wind gusts, her breathing caught once, just once. But it gave him hope. The wind shrieked through the cabin's gaps like a mourning spirit. The fire had diminished to glowing embers, casting elongated shadows that danced across the wooden planks. Edgar dozed in his rocking chair, pistol at arm's reach. His eyes partially closed, but never fully surrendering to sleep. A piercing cry shattered the calm shrill, primal, spoken in unfamiliar words, but heavy with panic. He jerked upright. The woman sat bolt upright near the hearth, eyes enormous, hair matted to her damp face, gasping for air. She screamed again, more intensely, the same term echoing repeatedly. Curik, Curik, Curik. She writhed beneath the coverings, grasping. The woven blanket like protective armor. Easy now, easy, Edgar spoke, keeping his voice calm and steady. Both hands raised, palms visible. You're protected here. No harm will come to you. She couldn't comprehend his words. That much was obvious. But his tone helped slow her terror. Her gaze darted to him, wild and exhausted. Curik, she whimpered. One final time before dissolving into sobs, Edgar approached slowly. He crouched near the fireplace, maintaining distance. He didn't reach toward her, simply sat in companionable silence while the fire popped and the storm howled beyond the walls. Eventually, she grew quiet. Are you hungry? He asked gently. No response came, just that watchful stare, her body tense like a coiled spring. Edgar rose and walked to his kitchen area. He retrieved a tin of venison stew, opened it, and emptied it into a small pot. As it warmed, he added dried seasoning 0 and saged in, ladled a portion into a tin cup. When he offered it, she hesitated, placed it within her reach, then stepped back. She sniffed it cautiously before taking a tentative sip. Psst. Then she took another. By the time the cup was empty, her tears had ceased. Edgar released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. You don't understand English, he observed quietly. Or perhaps you simply don't trust me enough to try. She studied him. Her expression remained unreadable, but when he pointed to himself and said Edgar, she tilted her head slightly, then she nodded. Edgar, she repeated. That evening, after she had fallen into restless slumber again, Edgar sat by the hearth, gazing at the old chest in the corner. It hadn't been opened in 2 winters, not since Maria's death. Dust coated its surface, and the leather bindings had stiffened with age. Still, he approached it, knelt, and unfastened the straps. Inside, carefully folded, were Maria's belongings. A crimson wool dress, a knitted shawl, a lavender sachet long since faded but still holding traces of fragrance. He brought the dress to his face. The fabric felt softer than memory suggested. His throat constricted. Forgive me, Maria, he whispered. But she needs this more than memories do. The following morning, he laid the dress on the bed's edge. When the woman awakened, she stared at it as if it were something sacred. Edgar gestured, then turned away to grant her privacy. Later, when she emerged wearing the red wool dress, it hung loosely on her slight frame, but the fit was adequate. Her dark hair framed her face in gentle waves. There was something dignified about her now, something she had reclaimed. Edgar brewed tea from dried willow bark and honey. He offered it wordlessly. She accepted it. Outside, the wind had died. Inside, something fragile was taking hold. By evening, she sat beside the fire, watching the flames as if they might whisper secrets. Edgar broke the silence. You have no reason to trust me. But whoever Curik is, ... Topple quotes. He's not getting you back. She looked at him sharply as fear flickered in her eyes. No, take me back, she said slowly, voice trembling. Edgar leaned closer. Nobody's taking you anywhere. She shivered, but not from cold. Slowly, he placed a hand on his chest. You're safe. You're free. I'll die before I let them take you. For a moment, she stared at him, unblinking, searching. Then gradually, she nodded. and for the first time, the tension around her eyes began to ease. Days drifted by like slow-moving clouds. The snow outside softened, but the cold lingered, keeping the cabin locked in peaceful stillness. Inside, life had begun to transform. Tianita, she had whispered the name one morning, barely audible. She moved through the space like a spirit, relearning her own body. Though she still spoke sparingly, her eyes no longer jumped at every noise. She helped collect kindling from the woodpile, stirred stew with practiced movements, and once even smiled. Faintly, when Edgar singed his fingers attempting to light the stove. Tianita, Edgar repeated her name softly by the fire that evening. That's beautiful. What's its meaning? She looked at him from across the hearth, then said slowly, dancing flower. He blinked, surprised by that revelation. Well, he said with a grin, seems gentle for someone who nearly defeated 3 bounty hunters with just a look. She gave a small, silent laugh. That night, as the wind whispered softly against the eaves, Edgar pulled a worn, leather-bound book from the shelf. It had belonged to Maria. She used to read from it, aloud an old missionary's journal documenting his time among the Apache and other southwestern tribes. The spine cracked as he opened it. He slid it across the floor to Tianita. She hesitated before picking it up. Her fingers traced the faded gold lettering on the cover, then opened it carefully. The pages carried the scent of smoke and lavender. When she reached a hand-drawn symbol, circles surrounded by feathers, she froze. She pointed. This, she whispered. Edgar leaned forward. You recognize it? Tianita nodded. My family. Bear Clan, my father. She paused, searching for the word. Healer, curandero, a medicine man. Edgar asked gently. Yes. She turned another page. Ceremonial blanket. Another a drawing of an initiation rite, woven patterns, a girl standing alone at dawn. My day, she said, tapping the page. When I become woman? He nodded, watching her. She was remembering her identity, piece by piece. Later, wrapped in her blanket, she sat staring into the fire. He wants me, she said suddenly. Kurik, big warrior, kills many. Wants alliance. Asks father for me. Edgar sat still, letting the silence stretch. My father says yes for peace, for clan. But you ran, Edgar said quietly. Tianita nodded. 3 days before, I hear him talk with others. Says he will tame me. Her voice trembled. He break me. She clutched the blanket tighter. I try escape. They find me. Tie hands, say they wait until day. She paused, then said storm came. We're scared. I fall down ravine. Edgar felt his gut twist. They thought you were dead. She nodded. I walk long time, then no more. Then you. He leaned back, letting it all settle. They'll come, he said after a moment. Kurik, or someone he sends, when they find out you're alive. Tianita didn't flinch. She looked into the fire as though she'd known it all along. Edgar stared at the flames too, then asked, Are you ready to fight for your freedom? She looked at him, eyes dark and steady, and she nodded once. Yes. He stood slowly, went to the door and opened it to the night. The storm had passed. Stars were sharp and cold above the trees. He turned back to her. Then we leave at first light. Us. Snow had softened to a silence that felt alive. The pines drooped under its weight, and the cabin stood like a lone sentinel, dark against the pale world. Inside, the fire whispered, guarding the sanctuary they had built from cold, from fear. From everything they had left behind. It was past midnight when Edgar heard the sound, hooves, muffled, careful. He moved slowly from the hearth, rifle within reach. At the window, he saw them. 3 riders wrapped in dust-colored coats, snow clinging to their hats. One of them knocked hard. Edgar opened the door just a crack. Evening. Looking for a runaway redskin, the leader said. $500. Word is she passed this way. You heard wrong, Edgar replied evenly. Nothing here but smoke and silence. Another man squinted toward the corral. That blanket on your horse. Red River pattern. Edgar didn't miss a beat. Traded it years ago. I like the colors. The third man leaned forward. You got any women in there? Edgar's voice was flat. Ghosts. A beat of silence passed. Then the leader said, "We'll be around." They turned and rode off into the dark. Edgar shut the door, bolted it, leaned against the wood. His chest rose and fell like a storm-split sea. He waited, listened, then crept back to the window. No sign of them. He turned. Tianita sat at the hearth, motionless, wrapped in her blanket like a warrior's shroud. The firelight flickered across her face, carving strength into her features. "There. Gone," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes fierce but calm. "You could have run." "You stayed too," she answered. They didn't speak after that, just sat side by side, listening to the fire breathe. Then hoofbeats. They were back. Edgar stood, revolver in hand. Tianita rose beside him, tightening the blanket around her shoulders. Her face was carved from silence. The leader's voice called from outside, low and mocking. "We know she's in there. Bring her out." Tianita stepped forward. Her voice rose not in English, but in Apache, low at first, then rising like thunder. She began to chant ancient words, words that bent the air. "You bring death on your heads," she shouted. "This land is sacred. This fire's protected. Spirits will claim your bones." The wind shifted. The men outside paused. Their horses snorted. One backed away. Inside, Edgar stood frozen, not in fear, but in awe. Tianita didn't just speak, she summoned. She commanded. Her voice was storm and stone. Her eyes lit with firelight, unblinking. One of the bounty hunters reached for his weapon. Tianita stepped closer to the door, arms outstretched. "Leave this place or be buried by it." The fire cracked. Shadows danced. Then they turned. Without another word, the men mounted and rode away fast, careless, desperate to be gone. When silence returned, it was deeper than before. Tianita collapsed to her knees. Edgar rushed to her side. "You did it," he said, breathless. "You scared them off." She looked at him with wide eyes, still trembling. "I needed to protect home." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did." They knelt, their forehead to forehead, fire between them, heart beside heart. "You didn't run," he said quietly. "They would take me. You could have still run, but you didn't." Closed her eyes. "Who stayed too?" He touched her face, brushed away a tear she hadn't known was falling. "I'm staying too," he whispered. Outside, the snow kept falling. Sigh. Inside, they faced the storm together. The dawn broke cold and bitter. Smoke still drifted from the cabin's chimney as Edgar packed the final satchel, cinching it with rawhide and snow-numb fingers. The decision had been made in silence, the kind of decision that doesn't need words. They couldn't stay. The bounty hunters would return, or worse, word would spread. Kurik's men would come eventually. Edgar knew that, while the mountains might hide them for a time, they wouldn't protect them forever. Tianita helped where she could, loading food into saddlebags, rolling blankets. She had braided her hair, tightly fastened her blanket like armor. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Resolve. They rode south at first, keeping close to the river before veering west into the deep pine forest, away from the main trails. Snow crunched beneath hooves and branches scratched at their sleeves. Smokey carried the heavier load. Tianita's horse, a chestnut mare Edgar had once broken himself, moved cautiously, responding to Edgar's voice as he guided from the front. "You ever ridden before?" he called back. She shook her head. "Only once. Not far. Not like this." "Well," he said, giving her reins a little slack, "then we learn as we go." They moved carefully through a rocky pass. Deer tracks crossed their path. Tianita signaled with her hand, 2 fingers bent slightly. "Doe," she whispered. 2 days. Edgar looked down at the faint impressions. "That's how you tell?" She nodded. "Spacing, angle, snow melt." "Damn," he said with quiet admiration. "You see the world different than I do?" "You ride like wind," she said. He laughed. "Took years. Horses taught me more than most men ever did." They camped that night beneath a ridge of black stone. Wind funneled low like a whispering voice. Edgar made a small fire shielded by rocks. He roasted salted meat and shared dried apples from a jar he'd packed in haste. Tianita stared at the flames for a long time before speaking. I never knew my mother. Edgar looked up. She died when I was a child. Not in sickness, not in childbirth. She paused, swallowing. Kiriki came to our village before, said he wanted alliance. My father refused. She looked away. The next week she was found by the river, face broken, Edgar's hands clenched. He murdered her. Tianita nodded slowly. But no proof, no war. Only silence. Jesus, Edgar muttered. How does a man like that walk free? Because he makes others fear more than they love, she said softly. They didn't speak again that night. The next day she rode better, stronger in the saddle. Edgar watched her learn her shoulders straightening, her body trusting the animal. Beneath her, he taught her how to adjust stirrups, how to lean into turns, how to hold tight with her knees during descent. She taught him how to read the land, not just tracks, but shifts in light, the behavior of birds, where the wind carried. Sound. They moved through the wilderness as one. On the third night, they camped beneath the stars near a frozen creek, flames dancing in a shallow pit. Edgar laid out a rabbit they had snared together. Snowflakes melted on his coat as he leaned against a boulder, watching her sip tea. You know, he said quietly, Maria, my wife, she used to say the land never forgets, that it remembers every footstep, every wound. Tianita looked up. She was kind, he said. Sharp too. She'd have liked you. What happened to her? Tianita asked. He stared into the fire. Renegades. White mostly, some drunk, some worse. They came in the night, torched our house. I fought, but I was too slow. She died saving our dog. Tianita didn't speak. She reached over and gently placed her hand over his. He met her eyes. I thought I buried my heart with her, he said. They sat in silence. Then slowly, Edgar took her hand in both of his. Snow fell quietly around them, the world shrinking to fire and skin and breath. You're not someone I saved, he said. Someone I need beside me, will you let me? Her breath caught. The wind shifted. Tianita looked down at their hands, then back up at him. Yes, she whispered. The fire cracked. The stars listened, and two hearts, long frozen by loss, began to thaw. In each other's warmth, the path curved upward into a narrow pass where wind cut through the rocks like a blade. Pines stood in silent rows, branches coated in hoarfrost, the sky above, paling from blue to the color of bone. Edgar rode ahead, guiding the horses up the incline while Tianita scanned the trail behind them. That's when they saw him, a lone figure. Standing in the clearing ahead, unmoving, tall, cloaked in fur, his face painted with ash-gray lines. He held no weapon in hand, but he wore the presence of a man who didn't need one. Edgar reached for his revolver instinctively. Don't, Tianita said, pulling up beside him. You know him?
No.
She squinted, then nodded slowly. Nikai, my cousin. She dismounted before Edgar could stop her and walked forward with measured steps. Nikai didn't move, didn't blink until she stood within 3 feet of him. They spoke in Apache, sharp, heavy with memory. Edgar watched, tense. Finally, she turned. Back, her expression unreadable. He says my father is dying, she said. He calls me home to break the curse. What curse? Edgar asked. She looked at Nikai, then back to Edgar. They believe my flight dishonored the clan.
What?
Unless I return, war will follow, Kirik. Tianita nodded. He tells the elders I betrayed peace, that I fled duty. He says without me, there can be no alliance. He stirs fear. Edgar stepped down from his horse, jaw tight. So what? They expect you to go back to him? Nikai took a step forward. She must face the circle, speak before the fire. Let the spirits decide. Edgar stared at him. What? And what does Kirik think of that? Nikai's eyes narrowed. What? He wants blood. Yours, hers, anyone who stands in the way. We'll make war, Tianita said, her voice quiet. Not just with us, with other clans, with settlers. We'll burn everything. Silence pressed down like snow. Nakai stepped closer, speaking directly to Edgar. You do not understand our law. If she returns willingly, she may challenge him. If she does not, she becomes the excuse he needs. Edgar's hands curled into fists. She's no man's property. Nakai stared, impassive. If she wants to fight, Edgar continued, voice rising, I'll fight with her. But no. No chief, no cousin, no ghosties, dragging her back. Tianita looked at him, her breath trembling. I don't want to go back to him, she whispered. But I can't run forever. If I run, people die. My people. Edgar met her eyes. Then we don't run. She inhaled deeply, then turned to Nakai, her voice steady. I will come, and not to kneel but to speak. Nakai gave a slow nod. Then prepare. Mountain weights. That night, their campfire burned low in a stone hollow. The trees rustled with messages neither of them could hear, but both could feel. Tianita sat cross-legged, painting lines of red ochre on her arm, symbols of the Bear clan. Edgar watched her, then took out his whetstone and began sharpening his knife. Neither spoke of fear, only duty. I thought we were almost free, Edgar murmured. We are, she replied. Even if I die, I choose it. He looked up at her. You're not dying. You're standing, and I'm standing with you. Tianita met his gaze, then reached across the fire, took her hand. The stars above them blinked through the trees. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, the same one that had followed them for days, now sounding closer as if bearing witness. They didn't sleep much, but they didn't sleep apart. Morning would bring judgment. But tonight, they were still free. The trail to the tribal lands wound through stone and silence. Pines grew denser, taller, as if guarding the sacred valley ahead. Frost clung to the branches like forgotten prayers. Traveled in the shadow of the sacred mountain, three riders bound by blood, memory, and something not yet named. Edgar rode slightly behind, his eyes always scanning the flanks. Tianita led with confidence, her spine straight, her breath steady. Nakai brought up the rear, silent as smoke, but always watching. Each night they made camp beneath the stars. Their fires small, their voices low. And each morning, before breaking camp, Tianita and Edgar trained. She practiced with the hunting knife Nakai had given her, quick slashes at saplings, clean throws at notched logs. Her movements were fluid, her breath even. She moved like someone who had already imagined herself dead and chosen to live instead. Aim with the heart first, she said, as Edgar helped her refine her grip. Then the blade listens, he grinned. I'll remember that. In return, he placed a revolver in her palm. Now you learn my language. She looked at it with suspicion. I do not like the noise. Neither do I, Edgar said. But sometimes noise is the only thing men understand. He guided her fingers gently over the grip, showed her how to brace against the kick, how to breathe just before the shot. Her first try sent the bullet wide, but the second nicked bark. By the third morning, she split a pine cone from 10 paces. You're a fast learner, he said. She didn't answer. Well, just reloaded. That afternoon, Nakai approached Edgar while Tianita bathed in the river. He stood without hostility, but there was tension in his stance. You love her, he said, not as a question. Edgar didn't hesitate. Yes. Nakai's brow furrowed. You are not of her people. I know. You are not her future. Maybe not, Edgar said, voice calm. But I am her present, and I would die for her. Nakai studied him for a long time, then nodded slowly. Then live for her first. That night, while Tianita slept beside the fire, wrapped in her blanket, Edgar sat apart with his revolver in his lap. He pulled out a small carving blade one Maria had once used on buttons and began etching letters into the wooden grip. He worked slowly, carefully, every stroke deliberate. Tianita. When he finished, he ran his thumb over the letters, then whispered to the flames, This gun fires. Only for her. Nakai saw it the next morning. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered on Edgar's hands longer than before. They reached the edge of the sacred valley on the 6th day. A ring of standing stones marked the threshold. Beyond it, Smoke curled from fires. Children's laughter echoed. Through the trees, the tribe had gathered. The drummers began to beat slow, steady rhythms. Tianita dismounted and turned to Edgar. "I go ahead alone," he started to protest, but she held up a hand. "If I do not stand on my own feet, I cannot stand at all." He nodded once, swallowing the words he wanted to say. She stepped forward, past the stones, into the arms of a waiting elder. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd, faces turned. Some recognized her. Others stared as if seeing a ghost. Edgar stayed behind with Nikai, watching her shrink into the crowd. "She walks into the fire," Nikai murmured. "And I'll walk in after her," Edgar said. Nikai didn't smile, but he didn't disagree. That night, as drums echoed into the mountains, Edgar sat by the edge of camp, his hand resting on the gun bearing her name. His body was ready for war, but his heart was waiting for her return. The council fire was lit just after sunset. At the center of the tribal circle, flames rose, tall and alive, casting flickering shadows across painted faces and worn ceremonial. Robes elders sat in silence on carved stones. Warriors lined the edges, hands resting on knives, tomahawks, and bows. The entire valley seemed to hold its breath. Tianita stepped into the ring alone. She wore no war paint, no armor only. Her blanket fastened tightly across her shoulders and the knife at her belt. Her hair was braided with feathers of mourning and defiance. Her face was steady. Curic was already waiting massive, shirtless. Despite the cold, his chest marked with scars, both earned and taken. He sneered at her as she approached. "The lost bride returns," he said loud enough for all to hear. "Will you finally kneel and beg forgiveness?" Tianita didn't blink. "No, I came to speak the truth." A hush fell over the circle. "My name is Tianita, daughter of a Hoot, Bear clan. I was promised without my voice, but I am not silent. I did not run because I was afraid. I ran because I would rather face death in the snow than life in your chains." Curic laughed slow and deep. "Chains. I offered you a place of honor. You offered me submission after murdering my mother to punish my father." Gasps rippled through the elders. Tianita turned, showing her wrists still faintly scarred. "I was tied, dragged, beaten. I escaped because the storm chose mercy, and I came back not to plead, but to expose." Curic stepped forward, fists clenched. "Lies from a frightened girl." "I am no girl," she said. "I am the blood of the bear, and I claim my right." One of the elders stood. "She invokes the fire circle." Curic smirked, "Then let her fight me." Before anyone could speak, a voice rose from the shadows. "She won't." All heads turned. Edgar stepped into the firelight. He looked smaller next to Curic, older, less adorned, but his revolver hung heavy on his hip, and the scar on his cheek glinted beneath firelight steel. "I challenge in her place," he said. "By your laws, a warrior may name their second." Whispers surged. Some objected, others nodded. Curic growled, "You are no Apache." "No," Edgar said calmly. "But I am her shield." The elders conferred. One spoke, "Accepted at sunrise, to the blood." It gave them until morning. In the tent that night, Tianita sat beside Edgar, her hands wrapped around his. "You don't have to do this, I know," he said. "We'll kill you. Maybe. But he won't take you." She cupped his face, tears shining in her eyes. "I would rather lose a war than lose you." He kissed her brow. "Then let's win both." Dawn came with crimson light. The ring was formed again, this time smaller, tighter. Warriors lined the boundary. The ground had been cleared at the center. 2 men, one for conquest, one for love. Curic lunged, first brutal, fast. Edgar dodged, but the Apache's blade caught his shoulder, tearing through cloth and flesh. He staggered, blood soaking his side. "Tired already, white man?" Curic snarled. Edgar said nothing. He breathed, watched, waited. Kuruk came again, swinging. Wide, Edgar ducked low, kicked out, sent the warrior stumbling. Then he struck knife, slashing Kurik's thigh. The crowd gasped, but Kurik recovered fast. Howling, he tackled Edgar, pinned him, hands at his throat. Tianita screamed. Edgar's vision dimmed.
Oh.
Then he remembered the river bluff, the rock ledge. He twisted, grabbed a handful of earth and ash from the fire ring, and flung it into Kurik's eyes. The warrior roared, blinded. Edgar rolled free, drove his elbow into Kurik's gut. Then, with his last strength, slammed the hilt of his blade against Kurik's temple that the man fell silence. Then the voice of an elder. It is done. Kurik stirred but did not rise. The Bear Clan is not yours, the elder declared. You are exiled. Two warriors hauled Kurik away.